Breaking tonight, Australia's surface fleet is entering a dangerous stretch of time because the ships carrying the Navy's day-to-day burden are aging fast, while the high-end frigates meant to lead the next era are still years away from being operational. That is the real story behind the ANZAC-class now. For years, these frigates have been the dependable workhorses of the Royal Australian Navy, handling escort tasks, maritime security, anti-submarine operations, and regional presence missions across an increasingly demanding Indo-Pacific. They are not irrelevant ships, and they are certainly not defenseless. With upgrades including the Seafar radar family, evolved Sea Sparrow missile capability, the integration of Naval Strike Missile and embarked MH-60 or Seahawk helicopters, the ANZACs remain credible combat platforms. But the strategic question is no longer whether they can still fight. The question is whether they can carry Australia safely through the 2020s while the replacement plan is still taking shape. And that is where the tension begins. Canberra has already accepted that the original surface combatant model was not keeping pace with strategic reality. The government cut the Hunter-class program from 9 ships to 6, while creating a second line of 11 general-purpose frigates to be delivered sooner. That decision alone tells us something important. Hunter-class was never abandoned because it was weak. It was rebalanced because it was too important, too sophisticated, and too slow to solve the whole problem on its own. The first Hunter is now tied to an operational timeframe around 2034, while Australia's first general-purpose frigate is expected earlier, with the first of the Japanese-designed vessels scheduled for delivery in 2029. In plain terms, that means the gap between today's ANZAC force and tomorrow's fleet is not theoretical. It is a live planning problem happening right now. 2 of the oldest ANZACs are already on the way out. 6 others are being kept in service and given more maritime strike relevance. And the Navy is trying to hold the line through a period when the region is becoming less forgiving, not more. So when people ask whether Australia has a naval gap, the answer is more unsettling than a simple yes or no. The gap is not just in hull numbers. It is in timing, in industrial tempo, and in whether Australia can stay credible at sea before its next-generation fleet truly arrives. To understand why this pressure is building, we need to look closely at the ships that are still carrying the mission today. The ANZAC-class frigates were designed in the 1990s for a very different strategic environment, yet they continue to operate across thousands of nautical miles, from Australia's northern approaches to coalition exercises in the wider Indo-Pacific. These ships were never intended to remain at the center of Australia's maritime posture for this long, but through successive upgrades they have been kept relevant. The anti-ship missile defense program introduced the phased array Seafar radar, dramatically improving air surveillance and tracking, while the integration of evolved Sea Sparrow missile and the ongoing transition to Naval Strike Missile has given them a credible layered defense and strike capability. Combined with hull-mounted sonar, embarked MH-60 or Seahawk helicopters, and a combat system continually refined by Australian industry, the ANZACs remain versatile platforms able to perform anti-submarine warfare, escort duties, and regional presence operations. But capability on paper is only part of the story. The real issue is the growing mismatch between what these ships were designed to do and what they are now being asked to handle. Modern naval operations are increasingly shaped by high-density sensor environments, long-range precision strike, and the challenge of multiple simultaneous threats arriving from different directions. The ANZAC-class can adapt to some of these pressures, but it cannot fully escape the limits of its original design, including space for future systems, power margins, and survivability in a more complex threat environment. At the same time, the operational tempo has not slowed. Exercises such as recent anti-submarine warfare deployments off Western Australia show that multiple ANZAC frigates are still being tasked as core assets, not as secondary support units. This creates a strategic contradiction. On one hand, the Royal Australian Navy continues to rely on these ships as the backbone of its surface fleet. On the other hand, planners already acknowledge that their long-term replacement cannot arrive soon enough. The decision not to pursue a deeper life extension program, but instead to maintain 6 ships with targeted upgrades, reflects a calculated trade-off. Australia is effectively choosing to extract maximum operational value from a finite platform while waiting for the next generation to arrive. That decision keeps the fleet active, but it also raises a critical question. If these ships are already operating near the edge of their intended lifespan, what happens if they are asked to hold that line for even longer than planned? If the ANZAC-class represents the present under pressure, then the Hunter-class represents the future that is not arriving fast enough. On paper, these new frigates are among the most advanced surface combatants Australia has ever planned to operate. Based on the United Kingdom Type 26 design, each ship displaces more than 8,000 tons, making it significantly larger than the ANZACs, with far greater capacity for sensors, weapons, and long-range operations. The combat system combines the Aegis architecture with an Australian-developed interface, supported by the next-generation CFAR radar, creating a powerful integrated air and missile defense capability. Beneath the surface, the Hunter-class is built around one of the most sophisticated anti-submarine warfare suites available, including a towed array sonar and variable depth sonar system designed to detect quiet submarines across vast distances. This aligns directly with Australia's strategic focus on undersea warfare in the Indo-Pacific, where maintaining awareness and control below the surface is becoming increasingly critical. The ships are also designed with growth margins to support future weapons, including the potential integration of long-range strike options such as Tomahawk cruise missiles, which would extend Australia's ability to project power well beyond its immediate coastline. In every technical sense, the Hunter-class is not a replacement in the traditional sense. It is a leap forward into a different category of naval capability. But that leap comes with a cost that cannot be ignored. The program has faced delays linked to design maturity and production readiness, with official assessments noting schedule slippage and additional cost pressures as the design was adapted to Australian requirements. Construction of the first ships has now begun, but the timeline remains long, with sea trials expected in the early 1930s and full operational capability projected around the mid-1930s. That creates a critical gap between intention and reality. Australia is investing in a platform that will be highly capable when it arrives, but the strategic environment is evolving faster than the delivery schedule. This leads to a fundamental contradiction at the heart of the current fleet plan. The Royal Australian Navy needs high-end capability to deter advanced threats, yet it also needs sufficient numbers of ships available now to maintain presence and protect maritime approaches. The Hunter-class answers the first requirement, but it does not solve the second in the time frame that matters most. Faced with this imbalance between present demands and future capability, Australia has made a decisive shift that changes the entire direction of its surface fleet. Instead of waiting for the Hunter-class to arrive in sufficient numbers, Canberra has moved to introduce a second line of warships designed to enter service much earlier. This is where the general-purpose frigate program becomes central. In 2026, Australia formally signed contracts for the first 3 of these ships, selecting a design based on Japan's Mogami-class, with the first vessel expected to be delivered around 2029. That single date matters more than it might appear. Without this program, the Royal Australian Navy would not receive a new surface combatant until the early to mid-1930s, leaving the aging ANZAC fleet to carry the operational burden alone for nearly a decade. The new frigates are not intended to replace the Hunter-class, but to complement it by solving a different problem. They are smaller, require fewer crew, and are designed to deliver balanced capability across anti-submarine warfare, escort duties, and maritime strike, rather than specializing at the highest end. This reflects a broader shift in thinking. Australia is no longer structuring its fleet around a single class of highly advanced ships, but around a layered force that can combine quality with availability. The decision to partner with Japan is also significant beyond the ships themselves. It signals a deeper strategic alignment in the Indo-Pacific, linking Australia's naval capability with a partner that shares similar concerns about maritime security and regional stability. At the same time, it introduces new variables, integrating a foreign design into Australia's industrial base, adapting it to local requirements, and ensuring that production timelines are met will test the capacity of shipbuilding facilities, particularly in Western Australia, where future construction is planned to expand. This means the general-purpose frigate program is not just a procurement decision. It is a race against time. If it delivers as planned, it will begin to ease the pressure on the ANZAC fleet before the situation becomes critical. If it slips, even by a few years, the entire balance of the transition could shift, forcing older ships to remain in service longer than intended and increasing the strain on both platforms and personnel. In trying to solve one gap, Australia has opened a new phase of uncertainty that will define how stable its naval capability remains through the rest of this decade. What is emerging from these decisions is not just a fleet adjustment, but a fundamental shift in how Australia intends to fight at sea. For decades, the model relied on a limited number of highly capable platforms, each expected to perform multiple roles across vast distances. That approach is now under pressure from changes in technology and cost dynamics. Modern maritime operations are increasingly shaped by the need to detect, track, and respond to multiple threats at once, often at long range and across different domains. In this environment, relying solely on a small number of large, high-end ships creates both operational risk and economic strain. Australia's response is to move towards a more distributed and layered force structure. The Hunter-class remains central to high-end anti-submarine warfare and future strike capability, but it is no longer expected to carry the entire burden. The general-purpose frigates will provide broader coverage, allowing the Navy to maintain presence across critical sea lines of communication and northern approaches without overcommitting its most advanced assets. Alongside these, the plan includes the introduction of large, optionally crewed surface vessels, designed to expand missile capacity and operate with fewer personnel, reflecting a wider trend towards integrating crewed and uncrewed systems. This approach aligns with the emphasis in Australia's most recent defense strategy on deterrence through denial, where the objective is not simply to match an adversary ship for ship, but to create a networked force that can impose cost and limit freedom of maneuver across a wide area. The expansion of long-range strike capability, including the adoption of naval strike missile and the potential integration of additional systems in the future, reinforces this shift by extending the reach of the fleet beyond traditional engagement ranges. At the same time, significant investment is being directed towards surface combatants over the coming decade, signaling that maritime power remains at the core of Australia's defense posture. However, this transformation introduces its own complexity. A more distributed fleet requires greater coordination, more robust command and control, and a reliable industrial base to sustain multiple classes of vessels simultaneously. It also depends on maintaining the balance between capability and availability, ensuring that the Navy can field enough platforms to meet operational demands while still developing the advanced systems needed for future conflicts. This is not simply an evolution of the existing fleet. It is a transition to a different model of naval warfare, one that is still being built while it is already expected to function. When all of these elements are brought together, the picture becomes clearer and more uncomfortable at the same time. Australia is not facing a simple shortage of ships, nor a failure of technology. It is managing a transition where multiple timelines must align under growing strategic pressure, and the margin for delay is narrowing. The current fleet still relies on a reduced number of ANZAC-class frigates that have already exceeded their original expectations, while the future force is split between highly advanced platforms that will arrive later and more numerous ships that must arrive sooner to stabilize the balance. The decision to retain 6 ANZAC frigates, enhance their strike capability, and continue operating them into the next decade reflects a calculated risk. It assumes that these ships can remain effective long enough for the next generation to take over. At the same time, the commitment to deliver the first general-purpose frigates before the end of this decade is intended to prevent a gap from opening too wide, while the Hunter-class continues to develop as the long-term core of high-end maritime warfare. But this entire structure depends on timing. If the delivery of the general-purpose frigates holds to the expected schedule around 2029, and if the Hunter-class progresses without further significant delay towards operational service in the mid-1930s, then Australia will emerge with a fleet that is more flexible, more resilient, and better suited to the realities of modern conflict. However, if either timeline slips, even by a few years, the consequences begin to compound. The remaining ANZAC ships would need to stay in service longer than planned, increasing maintenance demands and operational strain, while the Navy would have fewer options to distribute its forces across critical areas such as trade routes and northern approaches. This is where the real strategic risk lies. It is not about whether Australia can build advanced warships, but whether it can synchronize capability, industry, and operational demand in a way that preserves credibility at sea. In an environment where presence and readiness matter as much as raw capability, the most important measure of strength is not what a fleet will look like in 10 years, but what it can deliver right now. And for Australia, that answer is still being written in the narrow window between an aging fleet and an ambitious future.